Thank you, Dan. My name is David Cox. Thank you, Dan and Connie, for having me. I've known these guys for about 10 years now, and we first met at a rock club. And I think that is the best thing that you get out of doing these presentations is you're kind of giving back to where the genesis of all this is. And for me, it is right here at the clubs. Now, I brought this little stuff up here. Don't worry about this. This is just talking points for me, and I'm not going to do a full demonstration because if you don't know what you're looking at, it can be very ho-hum. Okay, it can be kind of technical and just, put your mind in a place where it's not very exciting. And that's what we don't want to do. We want to get you excited and kind of convey that this is something you can do. Now, Sebastian, how old are you? 10. Has anybody here thought about actually faceting gemstones?
Thought about?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
So a percentage, how many of you think you cannot do it?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody that has thought about doing it. Nobody that cuts and facets gemstones does not think the same thing. Now, the youngest person that I've actually helped teach to cut was 13. 13-year-old girl actually taught. And it can be overwhelming, but I put up here lapidary, I put the craft here, because whenever you see people talking about faceting gemstones, they'll often talk about, wow, man, you have a lot of talent. They'll come look at your stones and they think, man, wow, like you were just born, with a 40-inch vertical or something. That's not the case. This is a craft. This is something that you have to do all the time. And the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. It's with anything. So like I said, my name's David. I'm the founder of Toujours. I do this full time. This is my career. This is what I do. I do it all the time. I make a business of it. I have no problems giving information, where I go, where I, source things, how I sell it, how I make an income, what that income is, and all the different parts of it, how it has to do with jewelry, silversmithing, rock hounding, fossils, all of it. And a big portion of it is from the shows like you guys did just in November. I do about 12 of those a year. Some of them are very lucrative and a big part of my income. Some of them are smaller and not so much. Now, when you have a show like this year and you're like, didn't do so well, hang in there. I have to impress that upon you. Don't even think about how you did a show unless you've done it for about 3 years and you can kind of get a routine, because they do this and you kind of have to stick it through. That's me. I do the gem and mineral shows. I do the tech stuff. So everything I do, you see I'm recording now, this will go on YouTube. It'll be kind of previewed on Instagram. And that's a big part of what I do. The clubs, like I said, everything that took me to get started was right here in these exact rooms where you guys are sitting right now. And everybody that wants to know if they can do it, they usually want to talk about their ability or their vision. I can't see it. I can't see. My eyes are horrible. Well, it doesn't matter because you're using optics. So let's just get that out of the way. You're going to be able to see. We're going to be able to make you see. And the ability comes with doing it over and over and over. If I can teach a child to do it, I can teach anybody to do it. And you can teach yourself, basically. And that ability kind of gets beaten down a little bit by the things you hear. I came in today, this gentleman told me, hey, I talked to a jeweler that said that you have to be apprenticed into doing this, and you hear lots of these things about cutting stones. It's just, it never surprises me the things I hear. But number one, jewelers are not lapidarists. They're not facetors. Okay, facetors are not jewelers. They're two totally different things. It's like going to get your engine heads replaned at a guy that does brakes. Two different things. So when you go to a jeweler and ask questions about faceting, he's going to do the best he can. I will say jewelers probably know more about gems than gem guys know about jewelry. That's a genuine consensus. But they're not gem cutters, and that's where I got my start. Was coming to the gem and mineral clubs, gem identification, and that led me into being a gem seller. It shows. I just started selling. And I thought, man, I want the better gems. I want the good gems. How can I get the best ones? And the guys that had the best gems were the guys that were cutting them. And so I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I had never capped. The first time I seen a capstone, I think, might have been you, Dan. Might have been you. And world-class collection with you. Your UV collection, I've seen a lot of them. Yours is world-class. Tulsa has a nice one too, but yours is real nice. I jumped right into it. I literally bought a faceting machine and had never cut a stone. But my desire to have the best stones and to kind of prove some people wrong was just enough. And don't discount that need to get people back once in a while. That was a big part for me. And so when you do decide, hey, this is something that I want to do, then you start to hear about machines. What type of machine should I get? Well, I'm not going to get started because I can't afford this. This machine's $5,000. This one here is $5,000. They don't have to be these. I can cut just as good a stone on his machine as I can this one. Now, for me, because this is what I do, and I don't want to leave anything to risk, it's important for me to cut the best stones that I can. So I decide to spend the money on these. That's my personal choice. You do not have to do that. If you cannot read a diagram, if you cannot identify a piece of rough, or if you can't glue a gemstone to a stick, the machine's not going to matter. So that's where you have to start. You have to start with the rudimentary stuff. And I hear a lot of people, I can't afford the machine. I can't. Well, you can afford a $100 one, okay? And well, maybe I should start cabbing first. Maybe I should start somewhere here. Cabbing and faceting, two different things, two different skill sets. I was 5 years into faceting before I started to learn how to cab, and I was horrible. I was miserable at it. I could not get my grooves, and I couldn't get it to polish right. And I thought, shit, man. I thought this was, right? This was right? No, it's just as hard, a whole new skill set. The snobbery. You don't have this, you don't have that. You don't cut this material. You need to be cutting natural rough. It's BS. Cut synthetics. We are in a lapidary renaissance, meaning that because of the pandemic, more people have started cutting and picking up the gemstone craft than ever before. This is where it's at. You'll remember this right around the pandemic time is when faceting and all these things come back full circle. It really went away with the kind of the invention of personal computers, gaming decks. People stopped using this. When they got their hands on something else, this stopped. Well, it's back. And it's a good time to get into it, but you are kind of at the top of that crescendo, which means your gym shows aren't going to be quite as well because they were really awesome the last 3 or 4 years. Now they're kind of, and that's okay. We're just kind of making a little correction. They'll do that. Don't worry about that. When should you do it? And like I said, I could be doing a whole demo here, but this is what you need to know. You need to know what you need to know. How are you going to get started if you don't even know what the hell you're supposed to learn? That was the problem. And there's really two camps of people. There are people that are like, I'm not going to show you because it's proprietary. I've learned how to do this, and I don't want Dan or John or Gabriel or Eric to do what I do, so I'm going to just keep it to myself. And that's kind of the old school idea. No offense to old school, I'm falling into that group. But the new school idea, especially with social media, is we're going to show you more. We're going to show you what we do. And this machine right here and how I cut this stone, 2 years ago you would have, oh my God, you would have been pulling teeth to figure out how I cut this stone. And it irritated me so much. Now, being a middle-aged man, it can be a little more difficult. If I was probably a little more attractive, I'm not saying anything, but I'd probably have a little better luck with the guys that had all the secrets. But I didn't, and I wasn't going to play that game. There is obviously politics in everything you do, but we're a small group of people. But just, I urge you, be yourself, screw them. Just do what you can do, and the information's out there. So there's a lot of people that will show you this stuff now, and that's why this is a good time to get started. I love to show these things. I love to kind of peek the, pull the curtain back a little bit, and that's a good way to market your stuff too. Hey, let me show you how I make these pendants. Let me show you how I do it. Just because you show somebody doesn't mean they're gonna be able to do it like you, because it takes that passion, right? You're not gonna teach that. So how much should you be doing this? How long do you have to do this before you can go, okay, I can cut a stone? And the genuine consensus is this. I can have you cut a stone in about 8 hours. Sitting down in a full day, you can learn how to read a diagram and cut a gemstone. How many people think that cutting has math involved? You're wrong.
Or geometry.
You're wrong. You're wrong. There's none. There's no math. Well, I take that back. Very little. Very little. I use no math. Zero. I don't have time for it. I look at it. I use some very vague proportional theories. 2/3, half. That needs to be about half of that. All right. You're only going to get what that stone gives you. All right. Whenever you're looking at a diagram, when you're looking at, and I should have brought some, but I tried to really keep it very minimalistic. When you're looking at a diagram, you're basically just reading a map. For example, on this little setup here, this little faceting machine, what we're talking about, all you need to know is what is the angle and what index. So this diagram is going to say, please set this to 45 degrees and cut these angles, 9, 3, 15, 27. That's all you're going to do. Next row, boom. Next row, boom. Now, it is a little bit more complicated than that. There is some craftsmanship involved, but that comes with the doing it again, doing it again, doing it again. That comes into how much time should you do it? As much as you can.
How do you decide how many facets to put on it?
You don't. The design will tell you. The design will tell you. And you can cut freeform. You can go, hey, I'm just going to cut this however I think looks good and use proper angles. But we're not there. Like, yeah, we're not. Don't worry about it.
Do you have to invest in a program like GemCAD?
No, you don't. But what you do need to do is sit in that chair. That's the hardest thing for people to do. If you cannot get 3 or 4 hours to sit down and practice this, it's just not going to work. That's the hardest thing for me to do, is to cancel everything out, get into my shop, and sit down and work. And I use a little method called the noise canceling headphones. So I put my headphones on, and even though I may be able to hear you when you see me wearing these, and I see you out of the corner of my eye, I know if it's important enough, you'll stop me. But generally people are like, he's busy. So when I put those on, that's kind of my time to do it, because it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You probably want to cut right now, don't you? When you sit down to cut, if you make a little progress and you back off for a month, you're going to slide back. You're going to go to where you're making little mistakes. Oh, you hit the wrong index. Now you got to start over. Those little things, the transferring, you knock off 1 out of 4 stones. Oh, that's horrible. Then it'll be 1 out of 10. Then it'll be 1 out of 20. Can't remember the last time I knocked a stone off. But there was a time where I was knocking off half of them. That goes away. That comes with the consistency of doing it every day. So you take 1 step forward, or 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's just how it's going to be. Do it as much as possible. And again, you see I have clubs at the end of this. Very important. How? How are you going to do it? What you need to learn, what you need to learn. So I told you that I had bought a faceting machine, sight unseen, had never turned it on, had never listened to one of these things, what they sound like. I thought, you know what? For $5,000, boy, I hope I can like this. I hope I can deal with that. I can deal with the grinding. Kind of a big deal here, a lot of money for a little motor, but it's a complex piece of equipment. And I dove into it, And I thought, well, how am I going to learn how to cut? How am I going to do that? Because at the club that I went to, there were no facetors. So I'm kind of in a pinch. Maybe I can go to Kansas City, right? There's Kansas City, big city, there's lots of facetors there. Zero. We're a small community. And the guys that you want to learn from, just try it. Read this book. Hand me a book like that. That ain't gonna today, it's not gonna do anything for anybody. And so I started to go, oh, you really don't care if I know. All right, cool. And I didn't want to be in that situation where the only way I was gonna know is I got to buddy up with John, and I can only do it on Tuesdays, and I'm just basically going to learn some of his bad habits, and I really wanted to avoid that. So for me, I wanted to learn on my own, and I'm at least being a Gen Xer. I'm from the age to where I can just use the internet enough to be dangerous, right? So if it's on the internet, I got it. I just need to see it. That's all I need to do. And for me, I think that was my technical advantage, is that I could mimic. I could watch it and do it, So while I ordered a Facetron, that was the first machine that I owned, I ordered that, and while I was waiting on that, I got obsessed. I got passion. I wanted to learn more than anything. I wanted to have the best stones, and so I watched everything that I could find on faceting. And let me tell you something. We need to, as a group, maybe get some new faceting videos out there, because the ones that you watch are not that exciting. Trust me. It's kind of now put the index to here and you're going to, use these laps. And I wanted to know so bad. I didn't care.
It's good sleep aid.
Very benzoous, right? So kind of doldrum, kind of but I went through it. I watched them over and over and over. And I watched, okay, this guy says that I need all these things. Boom, 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 boom. I got all of them. I was ready. I just figured out, hey, I'm going to do exactly what they do and then morph it to my way. And that's really how the craft of cutting comes to be. Because I can show you, this is how you glue that dop on there. But when you go home and you buy your glue and you put it on there at your table, you're now making it your own. And that's how you will do everything. And you cannot do that until you physically start to do it. It will be horrible at first, but it will come together, I promise. The pursuit of difficulty, that was my biggest why. As you know, the things that bring us, there's a great correlation to the things that make us happiest are the most difficult things we do. Right? And that's why it was important for me to learn this guy. This guy. This is a fantasy machine. So this is a faceting machine. This is a fantasy machine. This will put concave facets, and this will put V-groove facets on a gemstone. I'm going to show you how we do that in just a second. But this machine made me be that guy for 7 years. I don't need that. I don't do fantasy cutting. Why would I need that machine? I don't do fantasy cutting. Man, that's nice, but I don't do that. I specifically work with flat facets, and I cut much more traditional style, and it was BS. I was scared of it. I was a little intimidated. It wasn't even the money. By then, by time I get this, I'm making 6 figures. I'm making almost $200,000 a year doing this. My first year, I was making 50 grand on Facebook. The next year, 150,000. And it went up, boop, 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 boop. Now I make almost that just in Tucson. So the people that will tell you, they'll tell you this, you can't make any money doing this. A lot can't, but some can. And who gives a shit, right? This is why you're doing it, because it's hard. You're doing it because it's difficult. I teach my daughter, she's not going to be 9, to do that, not because I want her to be a cutter, but I want her to know how to do difficult shit. Pardon my French. We're all adults except for, yeah, you're in there. Special member today. And so that's just where it was. There's these little situations where you're like, that's difficult. I don't think I can do that. And you really can. Anybody here can do it. But I will preface this. You do need some of this. You need passion. You need that desire to go, oh, I want to get into that. I want to try that. And there'll be those times. I know people that have picked it up in a week, in a month. And there's been people that have picked it up in 10 years. They set it down, then they came back to it. They set it down, then it came back to it. And it's hard to really tell what makes somebody grab what they're doing. How long have you been doing that? Crocheting.
This is
Needlepoint.
actually
Knitting.
and I've been doing it about 35 years now.
35 years.
But I've been crocheting for 60.
Do you love to do it?
I do.
Does it make you feel good when you do it?
When I finish something.
That's the payoff. That's the payoff. That's why you do it. It has nothing to do with the money or anything else. So if you get that passion, it's going to make all this stuff, all the learning easier. So to get just a little bit into the technical stuff, I don't know how much time I have.
We started early, so.
Okay, cool. So these two machines they look complicated. And I particularly think they could, X off some of the clicks and the whistles and things like that, but it's very rudimentary. You're just going to measure your angle. This, controls the height of the stone. It's got a flat lap. You can do cabbing on one of these. You can cab on a flat lap, so not a big deal. And we'll get to a point if you guys have questions about it, then ask me and I'll try to do my best to answer them. But this is just where you get your quintessential diamonds, right? You get the flat faceted gemstones. Is basically on one of these machines. Now people will often ask, can you cut diamonds? Do you cut diamonds on that? Have you ever cut a diamond? And yes, this will cut a diamond. But these were made as for hobbyists.
5,000.
Right.
Just checking that out.
I know. All right. She doesn't want us to go start pricing her material though. We're not going to go look at your yarn collection. We're not going to do that. But yeah, you're right. It's super expensive. But if not for these hobbyists, we wouldn't have this. So faceting, coming basically from Europe, India, originated gemstones, India, comes through Western Europe, makes its way over to the West. And now we've got people who are taking what is a hobby to them, and it's a certain group of people. It's a demographic. It's older men that usually have backgrounds in engineering or machinists or mechanics. And you'll see a lot of this in these machines. And they thought, you know what? We're not going to produce a lot of gemstones, but we can make that equipment better. And thank God for them. But they're not the best teachers. Right? They didn't really show us how to keep it going. And they made this equipment for us, and it's great equipment. But no, these are not for cutting diamonds. The main difference is that you cut a diamond on an iron lap. And we use a lot of composite laps, a lot of tin laps, and just a little softer material. Yes, you can cut a diamond on it. Not something you'd want to do a whole lot, and cutting diamonds is kind of apples and oranges. So all your flat facets and all your polishing is going to be on this.
What do you call that specific one?
It's just a faceting machine. This is a ultra-tec V5.
Okay, but how does it differ from the other one?
I'm definitely going to show you. I'm actually going to do a little movement here and kind of show you the differences in them. This here will do all your basic flat facets and your polishing. And like I said, I could teach you how to cut a stone in about 8 hours. Just sit down. We'll go over how it works because you don't know what you need to learn. You need to learn that this is a platen. This is the mast. This is the quill. That's called a dop. This is your water tank. Those are the little things that you need to know. You can learn that on social media or on YouTube, or you can find somebody like myself that teaches people and will sit down with you, because some people are a little more tactile. They need to be shown. Hey, do this. Let's go over this. Let's do that. And always do that if you get the opportunity. If you get the opportunity to sit down with people, do that because you're going to learn what they learn and what you know. It's always the best thing to do. Not really for me. I want to learn on my own and just steal their ideas, right? And don't feel bad about doing that because you can't steal something that somebody stole from somebody else, right? There's ideas. We're just learning. It's, I'm not saying copy people, but when you see things, think, hey, how can I do that? How can I make that my own? And that's how you kind of progress. So definitely pick it up. I lost track of what I was saying. But anyway, so this is where you're going to do all your flat facets. And I brought this stone in particular, and feel free to kind of pass this around a little bit. On this stone, this is just what we call the pavilion, the bottom part. But on the bottom of this, you're going to see grooves on it. There are cuts into the bottom of this that you cannot do with a flat facet. I'm going to pass that around. That's actually a natural piece of topaz, great color, good size, irradiated. And this right here, this fantasy machine, the difference is this is where we're going to cut our concave facets and our grooves. We're going to use V-wheels. And we use a myriad of different tools. But the first thing we do is we'll move this. We'll take this mast off of here, and we put it on here. Okay. It's going to hold the stone. Now, you can be a super baller and buy 2 of these at $3,800 a piece. Or you can just move it. I just keep my machines close to one another and move it back and forth. And this here, just with all due respect, is a giant Dremel. I've seen people do this work literally with a cordless drill. And I'll show you what I mean. So, let me find something to put in there. We'll use this. So you're just going to put your mandrel, and I don't have the right chuck in there. If you want to put, this would be if you want to put grooves. If you want to put the grooves, if you want to put what they call concave facets. And hopefully if you see some of this on your rock clubs or if you look up faceting groups on Facebook and you see some of that, you'll kind of know a little bit more about what it is. So here is your mandrel. This is just like a copper mandrel that would be just like a copper lap. No difference. Mandrel, lap, same thing. You're going to charge that with diamond grit, put a little diamond grit on it, and there's 2 controls on here. There's one that makes the mandrel spin. That's a good sound. That's a good sound. And then there's this here that will make it move back and forth. Super complex. That's just a Dremel. It's just moving. That's all it's doing. So when you have your stone on here, you're going to be putting grooves in it.
Do you have different sized mandrels?
Yes. Yes, different size mandrels and different attachments. So this here is a V-groove wheel that would cut the grooves that you see in that stone. That's what this would do. This wheel right here would go onto here and cut it. And you can take this piece off, move it this way, cut that way. You can move this different directions. And this whole platform will very precisely move back and forth like that. So there's lots of little things that you can do. So you get to the point where, okay, I got the mechanics of it. What can I do? What can I do? Using the basic idea of cutting, which is we want things at about 42 degrees. Knowing that, once you get that, and having this machine, then comes the, well, let me try this. Well, let me try that. Well, I see John put, he put concave facets on the crown, on the top.
Way to go, John.
Let me try that. Good idea, John. I'm going to try that. Right? Well, I see Dan put V-grooves just on the tip of the Q-lit, and it spread all throughout the stone. I'm going to try that. And that's the gist of it. That's what you want to do. You want to get to a situation where you're like, you know what? It's my time tonight to go cut. Let me get down here, explore a little bit, and do that. And for me, first and foremost, I was a gem dealer. I had a love and passion for the stone. I just loved gemstones. And the want to improve on that is where the cutting came from. And I actually brought some faceting rough up here for you guys to look at. And that is, I think, something that you could do a whole program on, because this stuff here can be a bear. It's hard to find, it's super expensive, and that's where your gemstones come from. But you don't have to cut that. You can cut synthetics, you can cut glass. There's so many different things you can do to lower that cost where it doesn't have to be this big, giant investment. And so, yeah, that's pretty much my presentation. I brought some cards, some pens, and some cabbing rough up here. I only brought 20 of them, so anybody that wants to maybe have my information to contact me about that, you're more than welcome to do it. Like I said, I'm an open book. I put everything on Instagram as well. I do some lessons when I get time at my farm. So I have a shop that I have different machines set up that I can show people how to do it. We do a little bit of that. Like I said, I'm on Instagram, Alluring Facet 1, YouTube, David Lee Gems, and whatever. But you get it. There's cards up here. Take a look at the faceting rough. Come up, check out the machines if you have any questions about them. Like I said, I could do a demo cut maybe another time, or if somebody would like to see a stone cut. But with it's something that takes 6 to 8 hours, it's like, I don't know if I'd want to watch that. And I'm all about it. So
We could plan some time. I'll bring my.
Gem identification?
Mm-hmm.
How did you get into that to begin with?
The short story is I got taken a little bit. I was doing some swapping on Craigslist, and a guy handed me some stones. I thought, well, I like stones. I was really a jewelry guy. But I thought they're the same thing, right? I like stones. Who doesn't like stones? And I took some on a trade, and it wasn't a big deal. But the issue was they weren't what he said they were. Right? Who's that happened to? It happens a lot. Sure. And I wanted to know. I didn't like that. And so I got into the gemology side of it and started to buy stones. Now I have all these stones. What am I going to do with them? We all have that pile.
Sable. Stash acquired beyond life expectancy.
I'm going to use that. There it is. Beyond. And here you have to start dealing with other people's stuff. And when I got into the rock club, well, you know what I did? I did a rock show. And I started off with sterling silver rings and faceted stones. And I would just put them in the silver rings. And that first weekend, my very first show, I think I made $2,200, and you couldn't tell me shit. I had figured it out. I had cracked the code. You mean I get to do this? I made like $2,000 in a weekend? I was starting to, look at my wife like, you're just a nurse. Right? Hey, what'd your education get you? Look at me. You couldn't tell me nothing. I was sitting high on the hog, and then I had a show where I sold 2 items. And then I had a show this year where I went to Miami and I lost $10,000 and didn't sell anything. Got blanked. And they be like that, brother. They be like that. That's part of it. That's business, right? But you cannot be like, this is just how it is. You have to persevere, because all the people that do flake off, they're not gonna come through. They're not gonna make it. And I was in a little bit of an exceptional situation where I could make myself available to travel for shows and things like that. And that in itself is just a whole other payment that, is amazing. But you can absolutely do it. Don't think that you cannot cut because it's too difficult. It is time consuming. It is something you need to learn. But for the most part, I think everybody has the capacity. It's like we say in recovery. Not everybody has the ability to completely get it, but we all have the ability to make some progress, right? And your gemstone may be a little...
How do you get symmetry when you're
It's you know what? It's mixed. That's why this is we call cutting by hand. You know, we're using machines, but this is still cutting by hand. And I have little tools that will kind of give me an idea of where I need to stop, but it's these. I have to look. I get an idea of where to stop, but I look at it. And just by seeing whether it's even or not, there is that part of it. But these machines have gotten to a point where your facets are very repeatable.
Do you have a checklist you do when you're going, let's say you're working on a stone and you gotta go do something else or leave or whatever. Do you have a checklist as you're doing a stone, all the different facets you cut?
No, I'm not very conventional with anything. So if I can't really do it on the fly, I usually get punished for that. I probably should have had a checklist in the beginning, but starting and stopping in this particular trade will be the death kiss. Because you'll come back, you won't know where you're at.
I have another question. You got a friend that has a jewelry store, and he wanted me to ask this question. A lot of times he'll get stones that are damaged or scratched.
Right.
And he wants to know if I know anybody that can repair those stones. Is this something that?
Yeah, that guy right there. This guy by Christmas will be able to do some of those. And they're some of the scariest things to do because they're usually something that somebody has a sentimental connection with.
Yeah, exactly.
But doing repairs, recuts, those are some of your best money makers. You're going to be spending an hour or two and charging, anywhere from $150 to $200 for that repair. So it's a real good money maker, but it does kind of give you that, ooh, I better not mess this up.
Because he's asked me that question a couple times.
Absolutely. Take one of my cards, and if he ever needs help, I'll whip him up. Not a big deal.
Originally, didn't they used to cleave stones?
They still do.
Cleave off?
They still do. We still kind of nap them when we just use. Well, we don't do it. We use clippers here in the U.S., but overseas in Africa, they still use valve stems to cleave off bad parts of stones. But as far as faceting them, yeah, they've done everything. Usually it was taking other stones to do that. And they will also take synthetic diamonds now. They'll take a synthetic diamond and they'll actually rub synthetic diamonds against one another to make it look like it's a real diamond rough. So it's very tricky business, and that's a little bit. And that's one of the things that kind of attracts me to it is it's not very regulated. This is still kind of the Wild West. But when you're buying this stuff here, you just cannot make a mistake. And so I think there's not enough attention paid to rough buying.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
I'm not super familiar with this, but outside of human competition, is there computerized automation of
Yeah, like CNC.
Where you plug
Yeah.
the keyboard in.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So for the sake of what we're talking about now, I want to put faceting into two groups, okay? There is what we call native cuts and precision cutting. And native cuts sometimes gets a bad, it doesn't really pass the vibe check with some people because when you say native cut, people think you're referring to the people that cut that as being a native. That's not what we're doing. What we're saying is that the techniques are native to what we do now, meaning they're the originators, right? And so when you buy something that's generally created overseas, it's what we call commercial grade. It's made over and over and over and over. And with what we do, we cut stuff very precise. We use the highest polishes, 100K, up to a 250K mesh with cerium oxides and stuff like that. So when you see the polish, even in the grooves, how do you get a polish in the groove, right? And it can be very difficult. We spend a lot of time with it. Where if you go overseas and you're like, hey, and you'll do that. Like when you start and you spend a week on a 5-carat amethyst, you're like, that dude's math is not good. This ain't gonna cut it. I can't spend a week cutting an amethyst. But as you do it, boom, boom, it progresses. What happens is your time becomes less valuable. So as you cut and you build up inventory, you go from, well, I need to also add in the 10 hours I spent on that, to, well, I have 100 of them, sell it for whatever. And that's just the nature of business. You build up inventory, that cost of labor goes down, and you just kick it out, and you buy other stuff, and you sell gold, and you do other things. At the same time, you make jewelry and sell it.
Do you buy
Yes, sir.
direct or wholesale for rough cut gems?
You know what? That's such that term. I buy everything I buy here in the U.S., and I buy it from mainly one person, just because it's so important to not foul that up. The parcels and stuff that I have are north of $10,000. So if I mess up on one of those, that's a bad week. So I buy from mainly one person. I will oftentimes overpay just to alleviate some of that problem, but it does me no good to travel to get this material. Because when you talk about, hey, I'm gonna buy some Umba sapphires or tanzanite, for example, I better go to Arusha, I better go to Tanzania, that's where it is, right? Well, that's not necessarily true. Because if you have $2 million in tanzanite, it comes out of C block or A block, that community cannot support that economy. Who are you going to sell $2 million in tanzanite to in Tanzania? Nobody. So it immediately goes out to Bangkok, New York, and so it comes to the bigger markets immediately anyway. So you can very much buy it here in the US, and that's just what I do. But the wholesale, retail stuff, it gets so overused that with the internet, we kind of blew all that away, and it just becomes almost scammy. Where you can't come in here because you don't have a wholesaler's tag, and wholesalers are like, we want the business, let us sell to whoever, But then people that are making jewelry are like, we don't want our people to get those prices, and it's just.
Well, it's like I saw a program where they followed a rough diamond from Africa all the way to De Beers. It's just amazing how much they pay in the field. The gem buyers go there and pay so much, and by the time it gets to London, the price is jumped 10,000%.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be that way, because that supply chain, while relatively long, it looks like with a diamond, there's just a high, the market is what determines the value of a diamond. It is a traded commodity.
And De Beers is a monopoly.
Somewhat,
Yeah.
sure. And colored gemstones are not regulated. So it will most likely be what I say it's worth. You don't have you have some guides that will say, clean aquamarine, good color, above 3 carats is 120 to 200 a carat. You get these vague, ideas. But with it being unregulated, it's kind of the wild, wild west. But it's a good way to get burnt too. Keep that in mind. But yeah, so yeah, yes, sir.
Talk about the grits that you use.
Yeah. So there's, it's just a step process, and there are people that have their preferences. Me particularly, it changes. I don't want to talk about it changing. I use 600, 3K, 60K.
You start with your rough at 600?
No, but I don't want to tell you what I started with. My basic cutting is 600. When I get a stone that's that big, I will have a 260 diamond plated, and I'll just get into it. But I know what material I can do that with a little bit. If I try doing that with a piece of tourmaline, it's going to break on me.
When you say 600, are you doing 600 copper with diamond?
Just whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's so speculative because one 600 may not be another person's 600, but just as if I was telling you, hey, go buy this material, I'd say buy a 600 centered lap. I'd buy 2 bat laps, one with 3K pre-polish and one with 60K. And from there, if I'm having grooves and stuff like that, because most of the time what people think that is contamination. And it's never contamination. I've seen contamination once or twice ever. But when people have problems polishing, they always think that their laps are contaminated. And you'll get these big threads on social media. Hey man, do this, wop dop dop, do this, do this, do this, do this. Nonsense. It's user error. You're not polishing good enough. That's the hardest part. That is what I call that's the deal with the devil you make. I can teach you to cut in a day. The hardest part's going to be transferring the stone, but the polishing, you kind of got to make a deal with the devil because it takes years to perfect and learn, and you're always figuring out different tricks. So if I'm cutting a garnet I'm getting grooves in it, well, I can't start, like I went too hard at first with that 260. I need to slow that progress. I need to add a lap in there. Maybe hit it with the 1200 before I go to the 3K. Get it really set that facet real smooth before I start polishing it. Because if you got grooves in it and you polish on top of grooves, you're gonna have grooves with polish on it. And so but none of that matters because if you start with those three, most of the time you're gonna have a stone that is already better than they're cutting in Yapir or wherever. You're gonna already off the flip have a better stone. So you're getting a jump on things anyway. So when I see, him cut his second stone or third stone, it's already better than most people are doing, overseas. Now, if you gave them this equipment and technology, yeah, they'd be cutting just as good as you. It's not, just you, right? But it is very subjective because some people will say, well, I want my pre-polish to be 8K or 3K, or it's just whatever you get comfortable with. It's like with using glue on the dops. People will say, my dops keep falling off. And sure enough, they go right to the internet, and the internet will say, hey, dude, you need to use 2-part epoxy, bro. What are you doing? I use 2-part epoxy. It doesn't work. Hey, man, it's 2-part epoxy ain't work. Hey, bro, you need to use dopping wax. It's the only way. They go to dopping wax. It's been 2 weeks on it. It keeps falling off. Well, the problem is that each time he switched a method, he started over that consistency. And that consistency is where your success is. Doing it repetitively over and over and over. It didn't work. Keep going over and over. It fell off over and over. And in that consistency, you get better and have less failure. So, yeah. This Dan.
What's your favorite polishing compound?
Diamond guy. Diamond will polish about anything. It's not going to get as good as a polish as oxides, but oxides are tricky. And generally, when I diamond polish something, it's to a level where your eye can't tell the difference. So if I polish something at 60 thousandths, you can't see much better than that. But I can get it to, most of these stones when they're done, they're going to look wet forever. They're just going to look like they're wet. That's what you're shooting for. But yeah, you don't have to go so excessive and that's usually what we do. We look at something so much and we beat it up and we're like, man, I can't get this. Why is it? Were you the only one? You're just noticing your own flaws. Nobody else is ever going to see that. That little imperfection with the girdle where you kind of had to move them in and one's a little higher on that angle. Nobody's ever going to see that. And it's not that you're being faulty. It's just that's fabricating. I don't care if it's
microscope or visor magnifiers.
Yeah, so your main optics are going to be an optivisor and a loop. Fortunately, I can see a pretty good polish without this. There are times when I have to bring it out, but I recommend when you're starting to use your optivisor and a loop. But that's it. Good light, lots of light, lots of light. I would use at least this amount of light with a direct lamp. And that's where the kind of the craft comes in, is determining how you see that facet. So there's a point that I call the twilight zone where when you put light directly on a flat face, it goes from like a mirror to blackness. And there's a little point right in the middle that will tell you just how smooth it is. And you just move it across And you just get real in depth with doing that. Like, okay, I can tell. And there'll be little parts, but I always, tell people, hey, before you get it, before you take it out of the quill, and you go to transfer it, be sure, examine it really closely to make sure that you did get all the scratches out of it. And you're always going to leave some in. I've never cut a perfect stone. I've never seen a perfect stone. They just don't exist. They're just, yeah.
So are you using epoxy?
I use epoxy and CA glue both. So on my table, that is super glue. And then when I come to the pavilion, I will use epoxy. And so I use both. And that's just my method.
So how do you get it, the stone off?
I actually use a heat gun. I know a lot of people that use torches and things like that, but just a heat gun is, because I've seen I've seen people get through this process, and for whatever reason, you click that propane torch, and they lose their shit. They're like, this ain't for me, right? Like, I don't feel comfortable, this, and you don't need that. It's overkill, and people blow up stones, and they burn themselves, and they go through. Just use the little like blow dryer, Seen a guy doing that on the internet. I'm like, I'm stealing that. That's my thing now, all right?
Is there a chemical that will dissolve epoxy?
Acetone, and on my transfer, that's what I do. So something very particular I've never seen anybody do this, but I was having such a problem with when I was putting the DOP. Let me pull this out real quick. When I was putting the DOP on the other end, just for reference. Well, what we're talking about when we talk about transferring is putting a DOP on this side of it, and then now cutting the table and getting this DOP off of it. So what I'll do is I'll get home and I'll put it into my transfer jig, which is just something that holds these. I'll put epoxy on there, glue it, and then I'll have this number with 2 DOPs sticking on it. Well, now I need to get that apart. So what I do is I take a pair of tweezers, I hold this, and I just get it real low into like a little, almost like a pill bottle. Thank you. Fill with acetone up to that level to where it'll just eat that glue off. And I just leave it in there, and I know from experience how much time it takes. Pull it out, pop it off, and go. And if you tried to do that your first 50 times, you will fail. You'll be like, I seen that dude do that. Or I seen that dude take that mandrel out. And now I've got this machine, and I don't know where my wrench is, and is it plugged? It's not work. Consistency, over. So, and that's what people need to tell you, over. Got to keep doing it, Everything that you see up here, you can watch be done step by step on YouTube. It's a huge resource.
What'd you say you put on the face? You put it on the face with? When you put the DOP on the face?
Super glue.
Oh, super glue.
CA glue.
And it comes off with a hair dryer?
No, that I use acetone. I use acetone on that. I use the hair dryer, we call, on the epoxy.
On two-step epoxy, you put in a hair dryer or?
Not an actual hair dryer, just a heat gun. Yeah.
Cool. Soften it up.
Yeah, it softens it right up, and you can just peel it right off. It's safe. It's quick.
Now the epoxy, is it just regular 2-part epoxy? Or do you use like UV epoxy?
No, I just use a 2-part epoxy. The UV epoxy, or epoxies with hardeners, had the reputation of not getting as good a bond because it hardens quicker. Generally, the slower epoxy cures, the harder
Okay, so it takes
it'll
some
get.
time once you put it on there. Though.
Yeah, I leave it overnight.
Overnight.
Yeah, at least 8
2-ton
hours.
epoxy?
What's that?
2-ton epoxy?
2 ton?
You ever use that?
I don't think I have.
It takes about 18, 24 hours to cure.
Wow.
It gives you enough time, but it holds forever.
Yeah, and even like with that, you can overshoot it because you don't want it to crack your stone either. So you're kind of listening to other people, but not too much. You're going, okay, well, I don't want to run into that. Let me play it safe. Let me try this. And once you adopt your way, take it. And that's why I think it's good to sit with other people that do it so you can see what their method is and go, okay, well, I'm going to tweak this towards the way I need to do it. You know, I may not have this tool, or I may not have this area or this bench to do this. What can I do? And like I said, if you can watch it, because that was the key for me. I was not going to attempt to do this if I could not get the information myself at my pace, meaning go back and watch that again. So as I'm cutting a stone, I'm rewatching over and over and over and over how this guy does this. So, yeah.
I just have one quick question,
Yeah.
and that is, will you be at the March show with your booth in Kansas City?
I'll be on the wholesale side.
It's
So-
just to see his work, it's beautiful.
Thank you. I'll be on the wholesale side because Terry James, the one that does the shows of integrity, she's a class lady. I mean, she's a class act. And I haven't had much luck with whoever does the Kansas City show. Yeah, just not real, haven't really made headway with him. So we just kind of let him do his thing. But
So, you talked about when you're learning to do it, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Kind of.
Mhm.
Do you get to a point where if you took a summer off or something that you're not backing up that much, that your skill's pretty much solid?
in a week I can notice. So if I do a 10-day show, I go to Tucson.
Take your machine along and do it.
You know, I have. I've done that almost in a gimmicky way because trying to do this while you're doing a show is impossible. But you may think, hey, I get to show somebody. Now, most people won't even know what these are. So what you end up doing is just beating up your machine as you're moving around, and that's not, so I kind of stopped doing that. But yes, if you take that time off, and you're not going to forget how, but what happens is you make these mistakes that you would not have otherwise made. You grabbed the wrong polish. Now you contaminated a lap, kind of. Or you didn't put it on the right index, or you got distracted. Those little things you wouldn't have normally done if you did it daily.
Cheaper back to 0.
Turn your cheater back to 0. Yeah. Right? And they're not things that you would normally do if you did it every day. So the practice,
You lose no matter what.
yeah, the practice is necessary, but it's not, you're not going to forget how. But yeah, so if you guys have any questions, just let me know. I'm going to leave these up here for a while. Please come get some of the swag. Check out the rough. That's interesting stuff. People will see that and they'll think, well, why is this tourmaline, $35 a gram, but I can get it for $15 a gram? Well, that's because this stuff will cut clean stones. And it's super rare stuff, but it's like, I've made that maturation from I love cut stones to now I'm back to the original again. Where this is more my passion, the rough stuff. And then I can create it. And once I cut it, I'm moving on, done with it. Just have no connection with it. So, yeah,
Well, does anybody
Thank
else
you.
have any more questions for David?
fair enough. Thanks, Eric.
You know,
Appreciate it, bud.
really,
Yeah, no problem, man.
we really thank you.
Yes, no problem at all.
This
I mean,
has been great.
it's my pleasure. I mean, it's when you see people do the presentations and stuff, you think, ooh, one day I want to do something and show people, and you get the opportunity to do that. It's a pleasure. So, thank you.
Well, you have shown
Thank you, guys. Yeah, and a big crowd. You guys got a nice crowd here. Yeah. Thank you. I'm humbled. I'm humbled.
perfect example of sharing what you know to all of us. And I think that's what we all need to do, is share what we are good at, and it just makes everybody and everything better.
100%.
So we really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Well,
Thank you,
that-
guys.
That about sharing is that from the Brown estate, it ended up with a couple of 3-ring binders full of tear sheets from Lepner Journal with the different schedules on faceting any one of 100 different stone shapes. So anybody that's wanting to page through such.
Get a diagram. Here they are, man. You might want to get on the other side.
I realized that I have a left-handed machine.
Oh, do you?
So let's start.
I was looking at yours as a right-handed.
So, we're gonna.
Yeah, it's.
I'm gonna come around and
Yeah, yeah.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a good what you would use for tanzanite? Because I'd like to see, because I bought some tanzanite rough and tried to. You can't make that happen with what I've got.
Yeah. I don't have any on hand, but I can bring some up. Yeah.
Because, you know, like, I got the rough, it's like, all right, you go through it, it's like,
You want me to hit pause on your phone for you?
no.
Oh, yeah, yeah, we're done with that. Thank you, brother. Yeah, it's.
And somebody told me, well, tanzanite is one of those textiles where you have to do it from the right angle if you